we're able to not only secure now POS chains, but basically anything in crypto.
Right? If you provide a bit of nudge and provide a bit of support, overall the ecosystem is probably likely going to be larger than, in value, hopefully, than what you have built yourself, right, for your own company. I think that's a sign of success, right?
In crypto, especially because the space is so fast moving, it's very important to keep a level head, stay humble, and always be open to like feedback and learning.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Fractal podcast. Today we have Luke, the co-founder and CEO of SatLayer with us. Super excited to have Luke on. He's one of my dear friends and also have just been building in the space for such a long time. Luke, welcome.
Thank you. And BM, everybody.
BM. Bitcoin morning, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, welcome to this humble island of Singapore as well. Hope you are enjoying it so far.
Always.
Always. Yeah, it's been a very interesting time in the Bitcoin and also crypto space over the past couple of like weeks and months. I think you guys have started just like really on a tear this year. In the 2024, and I think you guys have been making a lot of impact in the space recently. So we'd love to talk to you a little bit more about what's been happening and so on. But before that, let me, kind of maybe dive in a little bit to your background. But first, I'm Spencer, a core contributor for Fractal, and we do this, a podcast. We've been doing this podcast for a while now, and we really enjoy this. Just talking to builders, all that kind of good stuff. And we really want to just highlight builders that are like doing awesome stuff in the Bitcoin and Fractal ecosystem. So Luke, tell us a bit more about yourself.
I'm a first generation Chinese American immigrant. Was born in China, went to the States when I was a wee lad at 8 years old. And then have been in the US ever since until April of this year when I made the big move of our entire family back to Asia. To build SatLayer and build in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Went to school on the East Coast of US in Boston, MIT. And then afterwards worked at a variety of companies, kind of, non-crypto until coming into crypto in 2017. So started my career as a consultant at McKinsey and then worked at a variety of startups, large and small. So smallest was the first employee at a Kickstarter startup, where I think learned a lot of the same skill set that would certainly help me have been helping me now in crypto, where, for example, instead of just having users every day on Telegram, Discord, and Twitter asking when token, we just had our tens of thousands of backers in our Slack every day asking when shipping for our product. And also just, was kind of a jack of all trades on the business side. And then the largest startup I was at was Airbnb. Back in like 2014, 2015. And that's where I learned a lot about two-sided marketplaces. Once again, very helpful, I think, these days in terms of what we're doing at SatLayer. So on the crypto side of things, and with Bitcoin in particular, right, I had a couple of like touch points early on. So first was, when actually the white paper came out, I was still, in undergrad at the time, and not gonna lie, I just skimmed it and thought it was kind of crazy magic internet money, right? And then
It still is.
Yeah. What is it these days, right? So then kind of fast forward to 2011, that was when there was like that Wired article kind of, front page coverage of Bitcoin. And so I read that article and thought, hey, this thing is like still around. That's kind of cool. Then fast forward again to 2014 when, Jeremy Rubin, Danny Litzer, Chris Catalini, at MIT actually did a Bitcoin airdrop to all the undergrads at the time.
Wow.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I had already graduated, so it's one of many airdrops that I missed.
Oh no.
But as an alum, it was really effective in kind of just piquing our interest in Bitcoin. And so started chatting with some of my classmates about it. And at that point, that's when I kind of bought a little bit of Bitcoin as a forcing function for myself to learn, and immediately learned about crypto market cycles and got the full crypto experience because I bought in the run up actually to Mt. Gox blowing up. So basically I bought around 700 to 900 range, ran up to 1400-ish in the 2 weeks after, and then back down to basically zero after Gox flew up.
Roller coaster, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, right away, right? Great timing on my end. And then, certainly looked at space at the time, but it was so early. There just weren't that many use cases. And then so once again, then for me, fast forward to 2016. So I was actually helping Walmart at that time revamp their technology strategy. So looking at all this emerging tech for them, like AML, drones, mesh networks, self-driving trucks, and crypto blockchain. So that's when I discovered this Ethereum thing and the concept of smart contracts and a world computer. And that's what really, I think, helped me to really go down the rabbit hole and ultimately go full-time in crypto in 2017, right? Because I thought that just made tons of sense in terms of everything kind of moving online and digital. And so, in 2017, went full-time into space, invested in a bunch of ICOs, and, I think until recently have been more on the kind of investing side in crypto, but still, kind of been building up new funds, right? So I launched 2 funds in crypto. The most recent, which was, Press Start Capital, where, I had the pleasure of working with you, Spencer, on that as well. And so it's been great to have help, I think, so many early teams really kind of go from 0 to 1, right? So teams like A Priori, right, who's now building the Monad ecosystem, and teams like Zero Dev, among many others, like Force Prime that just finished a recent Alliance style cohort. Kind of trying to give some of my own contributions to building out communities in crypto. So I co-founded the MIT crypto alumni community Beaver Block, in part because I saw what Berkeley blockchain back in 2018, like Stanford were doing in terms of building out solid alumni communities, and I thought, well, I know a lot of MIT folks in the space, why don't we have a similar community? Kind of helped get that off the ground, and then more recently, as part of the efforts there, we launched the MIT Harvard Blockchain Accelerator. So no funding, no dilution, pure value add. Very similar, I think, in that vein to kind of like Stanford Blockchain Accelerator. We had our first cohort where, I also had kind of the pleasure of taking SatLayer through as one of the teams, as well as being a core contributor, so kind of sitting on both sides of the table there, alongside teams like Yala and Axel, which just, announced their raise very recently.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think your experience, across both the Web 2 and also the Web 3 space has just been a lot, right? Ranging from starting and running hardware related projects, which is honestly one of the toughest, right? As they say, hardware is hard, right? And then to building two-sided marketplaces, strategy, all that kind of good stuff. I mean, two-sided marketplaces is one of those things where it's notoriously difficult, right? Because it's you have this chicken and egg problem. It's just so difficult to incentivize one side and then get the other side going. And that is also what we see these days, right? In the crypto economic and also crypto ecosystem. And then down to also identifying early stage founders, early stage teams, back them, support them, and also go through with them through that kind of journey. And also just investing your own money into what you believe in, right? Those are all interesting things. Specifically on backing early stage teams, some of these teams that you support, whether it's A Priori, as you mentioned, or Zero Dev and so on, many of them, I think at the time that you back them are first check, or when they just have an idea, they haven't actually built anything yet, right? But how do you then know? How do you know that these teams are going to be it? What do you look out for when you back these early stage teams?
First and foremost, it's the founders, it's the people, right? Like you said, I think especially for these couple projects that have been quite successful, they pivoted. They either kind of came in with multiple ideas, which was the case with Zero Dev, right? Or they kind of pivoted more than once, which is the case with A Priori. And so I think, and that's kind of one of the benefits, I think, of having been a builder myself, is that knowing that, pivoting is fairly common and it's nothing to be ashamed of, right? But at the same time, it is a big decision because you're kind of potentially throwing away everything you built to date, right? And kind of changing things entirely. But I think, so for me, first and foremost, it's the founders. It's really a couple of key qualities. One is just a high level of self-awareness. And what I mean by that is really knowing yourself and being very honest with yourself on what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, right? And where can, for example, a co-founder complement you there, right? What are, for example, things that maybe aren't you don't love, but you don't mind doing that have to get done, right? And also just having, I think, some keen insights on the market, right? Because effectively, it's what's your edge as a founder? I think, kind of these things are very important. And then I think it's also, it's somewhere between like high EQ and humility, right? I think I think this is maybe a year ago or so, as I think some folks in crypto were reflecting on like the major blowups that we had, and I think it was the Bankless guys, and I think they said this really well, which is basically short ego, right? Because I feel like every time a crypto founder's head gets too big, like Do Kwon, right, or like there's many such like SPF, right? That's when things end up blowing up. And so I think in crypto, especially because the space is so fast moving, it's very important to keep a level head, stay humble, and always be open to like feedback and learning. So I think these are like some of the, I think, most important traits of founders in crypto. And then I think the one last one I will add is grit and resilience, right? Because I think in many ways, building crypto is probably harder than building in any other space, because crypto itself is so interdisciplinary, right? And so fast moving. Like, macro affects crypto, geopolitics affects crypto, and of course, like you have the tech and the community. And I think in many ways it is harder than Web2 because it's such a faster pace. Effectively when you launch a token, it's like in Web2 when your company IPOs, right? And you have like this very passionate community of users and token holders, right? That you now have to very actively, kind of engage more so actively than before your token launch, right? In addition to trying to, I think, build product for the long term.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think earlier you also mentioned about community, right? The importance of building community in the crypto space. And I think you've done that too, right? With the Beaver Block group and also the MIT and Harvard Blockchain Accelerator. I guess tell me a bit more about what is, how would you describe the MIT crypto community these days? If you have anything to characterize it.
So now we have like 200-ish people in the group, right? And it's kind of pretty amazing the folks we have, right? So we have guys like Jeremy Rubin, right? Early Bitcoin core contributor, now working on a new project of his own. We have guys like Christian Catalini, right? So he was one of the leads at Facebook's Libra/Diem, and now co-founder at Lightspark. We have the president of CoinList, the head of BD, Jamil at Sui, right? So it's a very, and we have like Daniel Litzer, who's kind of one of the co-founders of Nascent and like a leading investor in the space. So I think it's a very diverse group now, and people kind of at all levels, but I think definitely some surprises in terms of like quite senior folks in the space.
That's really awesome. I mean, of course, MIT being one of the leading institutions in the US, has also produced technology leaders across the world, right? Across the board. So it's really nice to see kind of the impact, and of course, I'm sure they're also looking to give back to the ecosystem, right? Like yourself. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was kind of the idea behind the MIT Harvard Blockchain Accelerator. It was like, we have all these amazing alumni in the space, right? How can we help the next generation of MIT and our kind of Harvard friends down the river to really, I think, succeed in crypto, and also bring more alumni into the space, right? Because certainly, I think it's been the case at MIT, just historically having been such a big, so strong in AI, that I think on campus these days there's candidly not as much interest in crypto and blockchain as there was, let's say, 2 years ago, right? And so as alumni in the space, like we want to do our part to help change that, and to get more undergrads, grad students, young alumni interested in working in the space.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I feel like I see the same thing in San Francisco these days as well. When I'm there, also just looking at a cursory look at the Luma event page of San Francisco, it's just mostly AI events. Although recently, I think, with the rise of this new narrative of agentic finance or whatever, AI agents, there seems to be more traction among the developers in San Francisco to go hack on ideas with crypto agents, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of an interesting observation.
Crypto works its way everywhere.
I know. It takes some time, but once in a while, we have this little sparks of interest.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. So let's now talk about Bitcoin a little bit. What brought you back to Bitcoin? And I think like, you've like had a journey, right? From like buying your first Bitcoin, encountering, I think some of the losses and so on, and then like building in crypto, and I think like, backing teams and whatnot, in the overall crypto ecosystem, right? So what got you back here? And also like, what did you have to like learn or unlearn when you first got back into Bitcoin and building in the first like couple of, weeks or months?
2 years ago, I was not paying much attention to what's going on in the Bitcoin side of things, right? Like at Prestar, we were investing in super late stage teams, but primarily in kind of like EVM, alt layer one ecosystems. It was really through, I think, chatting with, my friend Danny of On-Chain Monkey back in, this was, I think, it was during the rise of Ordinals. So it was 2023 then. With like the early rise of ordinals and inscriptions, and I saw that On-Chain Monkey was kind of one of the earliest projects to really work on inscriptions and ordinals. And so I invited Danny to come speak to our Beaverblock community about like what's going on in this like in this Bitcoin space that had seemingly been focused on Bitcoin Core, right, for the last few years. That really opened my eyes to like, okay, it seems like there's this ordinals and inscription stuff is super interesting, and so I started digging in a bit and kind of like orange pilling myself. It's been quite refreshing to build in the Bitcoin space, in part because of the opportunity to stand on the shoulder of giants, right? I think it's largely thanks to the work of guys like Danny, like Domo, like Casey, and certainly kind of David Yen and the Babylon team to really have kind of laid the groundwork for us to be able to build what we're building, and to also, I think, change the community mindset from the kind of Bitcoin maxism of like, say, 2 years ago when everyone's like, Bitcoin shouldn't change, it should be digital gold and nothing else. And now, okay, you know what? Now let's actually find all this additional use cases for Bitcoin, right? So that it can continue to grow and thrive. It was quite refreshing in that aspect. And especially I think being in Asia, because I think in many ways, Asia has led the charge in terms of this new Bitcoin ecosystem. The Asian Bitcoin community, including the OGs, are, I think, in some ways much more pragmatic than, I think, kind of the Bitcoin OGs in the West, right? I think Asia in general is maybe a bit less on the kind of idealism of like, hey, like, Bitcoin shouldn't change, but more like, okay, well, what can we do with it, right? What is like the risk reward here? What is the potential innovation, right? What is the opportunity? Because, and I think this is something that, well, is it last year? Yeah, 2023 ETH Denver, I was kind of reflecting a bit on how, if you think about some of the recent, trends and innovations in crypto, right? Thinking through like ZK, RWAs, right? Even I think DePIN to an extent. Some of which it's Asian builders, some of which it's Asian investors. But I think a lot of these innovations were kind of hot in terms of, kind of an investable area or teams building in Asia well before it was the case in the US, right? And so, and I don't think, we can get into this rabbit hole later, but it's a variety of reasons, in part due to like innovation and like, US SEC, et cetera, that I think a lot of the early stage experimentation innovation have kind of shifted a bit to the East. But that's not having to say, I mean, US certainly has very strong builders, and like I think culturally, US has always exceeded in innovation, right? But there's, at least for crypto, like there's been this like shift that you can kind of feel and is kind of like you can discreetly see over the last few years. And then I think to your last part of like, I think what I've had to unlearn, I think building the Bitcoin ecosystem and as a builder, especially as like an earlier stage team, right, is having to kind of make trade-offs, right? I think for me, it's, I certainly can be a bit of a perfectionist, and so kind of hold everything we do to a high bar. But, the trade-off there is like, speed, right? And so it's, having to kind of make some of those trade-offs and potentially even being uncomfortable with some of the things that we put out, right? But also being keenly aware, it's like in some ways when you're early, right? Like nobody really cares about what you're doing. And so it's only like once you are in the spotlight, right? or it's like being able to get the spotlight is what matters.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those things where I think like, being early stage or even building anything, as long as you don't compromise on security, like everything else, I think you can be a little bit more ashamed of what you're doing, right? Because I wouldn't say the bar is low, but it's more of like you have a bit more like leeway, especially when the spotlight, as you mentioned, is shining on you, right? You just have to like make sure that things work, right?
Yeah.
At a bare bones, and then you try to optimize from there, right? Which I definitely see on your end too, on the products that you guys have been shipping and all that kind of good stuff. So let's dive a little bit into SatLayer.
Sure.
What is SatLayer? How would you describe it to like an average person? And of course, I think you mentioned DBCA and Babylon earlier as well, and share with us a little bit about Babylon as well, right?
Yeah.
In the context of things.
So I'll kind of give a couple different angles, right? So one is for those familiar with, restaking, shared security, and EigenLayer. In short, we are building EigenLayer for Bitcoin and building on top of Babylon. So what that means is, I think, to kind of overly simplify, almost like low IQ one-liner ELI5 version of Babylon is building native staking for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin itself, unlike Ethereum, is not proof of stake. It's proof of work, right? So it inherently doesn't have staking built in. And so Babylon, through some innovations like its timestamping protocol, is able to build, at least kind of strictly speaking, as close as you can get in terms of native and trustless staking on Bitcoin. And so for SatLayer, we are building on top of Babylon to enable the restaking side of things and to allow the Bitcoin that's staked into Babylon to then secure apps, infrastructure, right? So that's kind of like the high level description. And then the more I kind of like peel back the onion a little bit, right? The more nuanced description is, Babylon itself, again, because Bitcoin is not proof of stake, right? For staking, the yield has to come from somewhere. And so for Babylon, the way that it works is the staked Bitcoin into Babylon is then used to secure other proof of stake chains, right? So that's where the yield is coming from, is the security budget of these other POS chains, which is then paid to the stakers. And then Babylon itself has this slashing mechanism called EOTS, extractable one-time signatures, that basically prevents against double spend and forking attacks, right? So these are, kind of the kind of key things that as a POS blockchain you want to secure against. But what Babylon doesn't natively support are all the custom slashing conditions that, for example, if you look at the EigenLayer AVS ecosystem, most projects want and need. So that is where SatLayer comes in, is we support basically any custom slashing condition on top of Babylon to then enable full programmability of slashing on Babylon, right? So this way kind of us plus Babylon together, we're able to not only secure now POS chains, but basically anything in crypto, right? Whether it's a decentralized app or infrastructure like a bridge, for example, right, or an Oracle. So all sorts of things.
That's super interesting. I think it's one of those things when many people think about Bitcoin, they only think about the proof of work consensus mechanism, right? And I think on the Ethereum ecosystem, Solana ecosystem, and many other ecosystems these days, I think since this anonymous person, Sonny King, wrote about proof of stake, I think they have been, of course, adapting based on those kind of innovations. And proof of stake has become such a thing in crypto these days that it's quite interesting. There's many different implementations. So Babylon, I think what's quite interesting about Babylon, as you mentioned, is that it extends that possibility out for Bitcoiners and Bitcoin holders. And then I think what SatLayer really makes it happen is almost like to supercharge the entire sort of like mechanism even more, right?
That's right.
So that's super cool. Okay, I would say like in some ways, from a user perspective, then, why do you think? So I think you mentioned about economic value, right, transfer and so on. But in your mind, I think like maybe what is concerning to users, or what would users want to see when they are like, I would say, staking their Bitcoin? What do you think they would care about, or you as a user would care about?
Bitcoin users are certainly different than, for example, Ethereum and EVM users, right? I think security is much more top of mind for Bitcoin users, especially kind of the folks that have been in the space for a while, right? And I think the one of the other things that I think a lot of Bitcoiners care about is really protecting Bitcoin like making sure the Bitcoin ecosystem is doing things that's good for Bitcoin in the long run, right? And so what I mean by this is that, you know, I think if you look at some of the trends right now that's happening for Bitcoin, right, like more and more global adoption, right, like nation states are starting to adopt Bitcoin, companies are starting to, MicroStrategy obviously, but like a lot of other companies are considering, putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Like Microsoft recently has like a shareholder vote on that specific topic. And so I think it's very much like, the early view of like, Bitcoin is getting bigger and bigger, and it's effectively, I think, unstoppable at this point, right? But if you dig into some of the details, I think that's where it gets a little bit, I think, concerning for the future of Bitcoin. So specifically what I'm talking about is like future happenings, right? And miner profitability and sustainability, right? Certainly in bull markets, great. But I think one of my co-founders, Arun, actually, gave a talk back at, I think it was Token. And he had this great chart on just, I think, like, mining rewards and miner profitability over time, right? It's basically one of these charts that's going to zero over time. And so if you play this out, right, let's say like 2, 3, or 4 halvenings down the line, right, Bitcoin is more valuable than ever. Maybe it's like 10 trillion, whatever it is, right? But miner profitability is getting lower and lower. And so at some point, you run into a lot of trouble, at least if you assume Bitcoin's digital gold and nothing else, right? In that the transaction fees are no longer enough to meaningfully secure the network. And so what do you do, right? So there's either you have to have much more usage in transactions of Bitcoin. Again, if Bitcoin doesn't change its digital gold, that's not going to happen, right? You can't pay for your Starbucks coffee with Bitcoin if it takes 10 minutes and it takes like $3, right, in like in transaction fees. And so then what do you do, right? So then I think one is miners need to get additional sources of revenue, right? For example, like merge mining, Fractal, but also to do things like staking and restaking, right? To kind of get yield in addition to just mining revenue. And then I think the second is to find more productivity, more uses for Bitcoin, right? So I think like in short, what we're doing at SatLayer is really to bring Bitcoin to the rest of crypto in a way that's one of Bitcoin's core strengths, which is security, right? Bringing Bitcoin security to the rest of crypto and improving security for the entire space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like the Bitcoin holder base is like just because of the history of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin holder base is a lot more long term, right? Maybe a little bit slower, right? If you characterize that, a little bit more like cautious, I wouldn't say like they are like sort of like older and like if you're to describe them as a person, I wouldn't use age, I think, to do that, because many of them are like super young as well, right? Mm-hmm. Many Bitcoin holders are just like some of the most talented, smartest people as well. Yeah. So it's not so much about age or anything. I think it's just more like they're a little bit more cautious. They want to see a little bit more. So having like good protocols, products, and so on, that's important.
Yeah. And many, it's funny. It's also many founders are closet Bitcoin maxis, right? So I think in some ways it's actually, it's helped in terms of the speed and growth of the Bitcoin ecosystem is like, like whether you're a Solana founder, EVM founder, all layer 1 founder, a lot of these guys are closet Bitcoin or even not sometimes public Bitcoin maxis, right? So that's been great to see as well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm sure like the kind of people that come to talk to you these days are also very different from previously, right? When, as you mentioned, sometimes the founders could probably just like come up to you and like, hey, I really like what you do because I'm actually a huge like Bitcoiner, right? And I want to learn more about what you're working on. So I think that is kind of interesting. You kind of attract a different type of developer base and whatnot. So maybe speak a little bit more to like, I think as you mentioned, like with SatLayer, you really want to like be able to help secure these oracles on these different applications and so on. How would you describe, like, I guess that if you were to like, kind of call out there, what would you describe is what you're looking for to build on SatLayer or to use SatLayer eventually?
We certainly have the benefit of like looking at what EigenLayer has done for their AVS ecosystem, right? And kind of learning from the successes and mistakes there. For me, it's always been kind of putting on my Web2 hat for a second, right? Like building what people need. I think in crypto, it's it's been a delicate balance in part because it's such, it's still relative to like traditional tech, like a very young space, right? And that there's still a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built out. But I think, the mistake that some founders make is that they are just too heads down building. And by the time they finish building their product, like the crypto landscape has changed. And so when you ship something that like nobody cares about or wants to use, right? So I think for us, it's very important to just always, I think, keep an eye out on where the space is going, what are the needs, and really building building while talking to constantly to potential users, right? And so one of the things that we're certainly focused on is building BVSs, right? Bitcoin validated services on top of SatLayer that can either address an existing pain point or need of, for example, a big player like like an F2 Pool Stakefish or like an Amber Group, right? So that from day one we can talk to the user, right? We can talk to the customer and get their feedback and kind of build iteratively. The nice thing about the Bitcoin ecosystem is that because it's so new, there is still a lot of like critical infrastructure that's either not in place or these solutions certainly have room for improvement. So I think some of these examples would be kind of bridges, right? Both within the ecosystem and also kind of just, peg in, peg out for Bitcoin itself, as well as ZK proving layer that I think can, kind of very quickly allow people to actually settle ZK proofs on chain, as well as I think, there's efforts around kind of improving the LST design, right? Potentially with a much more trustless design. So that's something we've been chatting with the Fiamma team for quite a bit on. And also something we're exploring that's, I think, also kind of taking crypto a bit more mainstream and connecting with like, I think, more DeFi use cases, right? So one that we've been kind of exploring is like insurance use cases where, I think insurance itself has had its ups and downs within crypto, but I think especially for anyone that's been building for a while, everyone knows that there's always, weird edge cases or black swan events that protocols and teams miss or can't always fully account for. And the likelihood of black swans historically crypto has always been like much higher, right? And so I think there's, if you look at stuff like Athena, a lot of these other projects, right, they always have kind of this insurance fund that can kind of try to catch these things. And so I think there's an opportunity here, but it's definitely quite a difficult use case as well, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like, what do you cover? What do you not cover? And how will the actual like actuarial math work out?
In general, as you mentioned, like through the application through the infrastructure examples that you mentioned, I think these are all like the critical pieces, right, that is needed in the space. It's not so much like, hey, like a gambling dApp or something, right? So it's not as light and surface level as some of those things where they can just like essentially use the existing tooling or networks already, but something a lot deeper than that, right? When they're going cross chain, or they're a little bit more in need of the shared security side of things, then it becomes quite interesting.
Yep.
So I guess like when you are looking at this, the life cycle of these projects, I think many of them may need to raise their own funding and so on. How do you think you'll be best supporting these teams? Is it documentation, or what are some of the things that the SatLayer team will help these teams with?
One is, we're certainly looking to learn from, I think, some of the best teams in the space that have built ecosystems, right? So like, Solana is, I think, kind of an obvious example at this point. But also I think teams like Monad, and then talking with our great and supportive investors, like, Castle Island and Hack and Franklin Templeton, and kind of like getting their support here. So the strategy that we're taking is, I think, early on, very like rolling up our sleeves and being very supportive of our teams, right? So this includes like, helping them with fundraising. This includes, I think, almost like building alongside them. So, next week, me and a good number of our team will actually be at the Babylon Hacker House to really, work with kind of these next generation of builders. But I think for us, it's kind of like, I think not spreading ourselves too thin early on, but working with a good number of teams very deeply to support them in all aspects, right? I think, in many ways it's similar to, I think, the support that, you, Spencer, and like the Block Space Force teams has given us in the early days. Like we want to kind of pay it forward and do the same for some of the early kind of ecosystem and BBS projects on SatLayer. And I think we are also scaling up the team so that we can also over time support like volume, right? Because at the same time, like we definitely don't want to turn down any teams that do want to build on SatLayer, but we just want to be very honest with the time and resources and like that we have, so that we are responsible to each team that build on us.
Totally with you. I think building an ecosystem is so challenging, right? I think I experienced it firsthand on the Fractal ecosystem. Where we really try to provide support to these teams, but you also know, I think it's almost like you also have to know when to step back and let them just kind of run their own kind of like progress and business. And I think I feel like one of those things where like if they're successful and if you provide a bit of nudge and provide a bit of support, overall the ecosystem is probably likely going to be larger than in value, hopefully, than what you have built yourself, right, for your own company. I think that's a sign of success, right? It's almost like as a labs entity or as a company building ecosystem, sometimes the ecosystem just becomes larger than you, right? And I think that's kind of what I aspire to, at least for the Fractal side of things, where I hope that an ecosystem projects and companies will be larger than what we have done ourselves, right?
Yep.
That'll be awesome.
100%. One point I want to jump back on to is I think for us in terms of BBS ecosystem, right? As mentioned earlier, like it's not just infrastructure, but certainly apps, right? But I think having said that, apps are quite a difficult space to succeed in crypto, because although you are seeing successes of projects like, like the Hyperliquids, right? Or like the Farcasters and Pump funds, I think the challenge with apps historically is it's a bit more of kind of a bit more extreme instance of like power law, right? Where it's like in any particular category, there's probably like one or two apps that kind of take the majority of value of like mind share. And you have like the long tail of graveyards like nobody's probably even heard of. And I think, I think certainly I'm a believer in kind of the kind of the train of thought that I think now is the time to invest in apps, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like, otherwise if building all this infrastructure, who's going to use it? But I think it's, definitely don't envy the investors investing in these apps, because it is quite difficult. And so for us, I think on the app side, like we're certainly kind of been noodling and thinking through like, for example, how can shared security actually benefit the rise of these AI agents, right? I think there's quite a lot of interesting use cases there. And I think, I was just looking at the staking summit schedule. I think there's going to be a lot of good discussion at that event on this topic in particular. And I think it's also, for example, like some of the things that was in some ways last cycle, I think has an opportunity to come back. Like one I've just been like, not shower thought, but it's like bed thought, scrolling Twitter before I go to bed, it was just like no loss lotteries, right? Like no loss lotteries work in crypto because of like staking yield. And so I think there's interesting problem space there where you can leverage now just not just staking but restaking, and potentially do it in a way that makes no loss lotteries, I think, compelling again, right? It was I forget who, but one of the Monad team members that I think was saying, could be interesting even for use cases like the election, right? Kind of, combination of no loss lottery and like staking and slashing to basically keep people honest. And then also it's like, everybody kind of wins at the end as well.
I think by the time we publish this episode, we will probably be already post election, which is going to be quite interesting to see, right? I think definitely, as far as I know, at least for the prediction markets, definitely seems to be favoring Trump over Harris. But the polls, I think, are saying otherwise, right? And we don't have to go there into like election, but I definitely feel like it's one of those things where I think like this cycle, at least, the prediction market product space has definitely emerged as quite interesting, right? It has helped crypto and I think the industry to kind of go a little bit mainstream and help some users discover these uses of like polymarket and stuff, right? Do you think that would be like an interesting, as an example, do you think that would be an interesting like product that could use Bitcoin security in any way? Yeah, or how do you view that?
I haven't really noodled too much on this one. I think there could be something there because, to my understanding, I think one challenge of prediction markets is that for any individual market, the size and depth just isn't quite there, right?
Or it could be like the Oracle side of things, right? I understand like the Oracle mechanism behind these prediction markets. Sometimes it's like, like who actually won and so on. Those could be like a little bit contested.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
So I wonder not like, for example, if like these stakeholders that are like making these predictions, perhaps, if they are, making the wrong ones and so on, there could be some slashing conditions tied
Exactly.
to it, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the things that, I think it's one of those things when sometimes these early concepts, I wonder like, if for each of them, how can you actually make it better, right? And I'm sure developers will be noodling on that, right, in your ecosystem too. That's
a great point you bring up, which is I think one of the kind of key unlocks for restaking shared security is these kind of, intersubjective / like less black and white situations, right? Where, okay, the like prediction markets is actually a great example because the majority of these outcomes are not on chain, right? And so you need an oracle or like some sort of source of truth, whether it's voting or whatever, right, to determine, okay, well, which side was actually right? And depending on how loosely some of these prediction markets are phrased or framed, right, there is some subjectivity there. So it's like, how do you keep people honest, especially if the space continues to grow and there's kind of like serious capital on the line on either outcome.
And then also, I think like by the time we publish this episode, the SatLayer DevNet or like docs should actually be live, right?
That's right.
So if you're a developer and you're watching this today, you can like literally go to, I think, the docs.SatLayer and be able to like look it up. So tell me a bit more. Like if I'm a developer right now and I'm like, hey, let me go onto the site. What should I expect to see? What should I expect to know and stuff?
I think by the time this episode is live, we will have already launched our DevNet. And so it will be basically a closed alpha, if you will. So if you're interested in building on SatLayer, at that point, our doc should be live. You can come and read up on, exactly what our architecture is, right, and how to start building. And then you'll be able to join our developer community and request access to our DevNet to actually start directly building on it. So it's, something we're certainly quite excited about. Teams have been working very hard. And, to be honest, I'm also certainly a bit nervous, right, because it's kind of, really, I think, our first step, right, into the spotlight, so to speak. I think we're gonna have some bugs, we're gonna have some kinks. So I would ask everyone to kind of be patient. But I think our team will be working very hard to resolve this, and also working closely with our early developers to make sure that everyone is having a good experience, good time building on SatLayer.
Yeah, I feel like that's one thing I realized about like building ecosystem and building products in a space. Your moment before you launch some products into the sphere, right, into the crypto sphere, it's like there's this really weird like nerve-wracking, nervous moments, and then once you launch it, it's almost like, oh man, relief, right? Whether it goes bad or whether it's good, right? You have this level of relief. But then you have this like urgency because your team is like, hey, there's now all this feedback and so on. I think that's very important, right? When I feel like the team, and that really helps to gel the team together. So as an operator now, like, I think you were doing investing before, you're building a lot of stuff, and now back at being the operating table, building these things. How do you kind of like, manage your own like, stress, and time and so on? How do you, any tips for, other builders in the space?
Having some key supporters around you that, and again, I'm going to use Spencer for a second. Like, I've been so, like, I think words cannot express my gratitude, because there were times when literally doubting myself, honestly wanting to just like crawl into a ball. And then I talked to you and like, you kind of like recharge my belief in myself and like in the team. Right. Because I think every builder, and especially in crypto, resonate with this. It's like sometimes it just sucks.
Yep.
Like sometimes you just want to like curl up and cry. Right. Or it's like, and the worst is like, God forbid, like, your project is hacked or something. And it's like, okay, like I feel like the world's burning down. Right. And so I think it's very important to have the support network in crypto, because as mentioned, like it will, I think, try you and challenge you in ways you've never imagined, in part because crypto is 24/7, 365. It's moving so fast. We have like nation state level bad actors, right? North Koreans, etc., that will every day think of a new creative way to like infiltrate and like steal your users' funds. I think it's very important to have that good support network, and also to have like, if possible, right, like family and friends that can support you, or even sometimes maybe people that aren't like terminally online on Twitter and living and breathing crypto, so you can disconnect a little bit, right? I think it's also, this again goes back to like knowing yourself, right? Because I think we both have friends that just may not be able to take this like constantly being connected nature of crypto, and that's okay, right? It's a big world. Like there's many other things that you can build even outside of crypto, right? That make meaningful impact, that make you happy. And so I think part of it, like me and my other co-founders, like my co-founders, SatLayer co-founders, were reflecting on is like, this is a journey, and this has its ups and downs, and there's times when it's gonna be incredibly difficult, right? So let's make sure we're having fun along the way, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're like, working from waking to sleeping every day, right? Being very stressed, if you're not also having fun, like what are you doing?
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like first of all, like, yeah, I think like being a part of like founders journeys, friends, and also like, it's just incredibly like awesome for me, right? I think that's one thing I realized, which is that you get a lot of energy. Of course, it's a two-way exchange, right? Like you can provide energy, but also like by seeing the successes and the highs and the lows of these teams, I feel like I personally get so much. It's like it's definitely not charity, right? It's just like I think a part of me is just like wants to build, right? Whether it's like with friends, or whether it's myself, or whether it's like watching other people. I just really enjoy the games and this like journey as well, right? I think like good founders like yourself, I'm sure also enjoy this journey, right? And have fun along the way,
100%.
Right? It's almost like adulting, but you're still kind of like playing games as well, right?
Yeah. And it's also a great opportunity and like journey to learn, right? I think it actually helps a lot if you kind of frame it as like, well, what am I learning from this? I think then, because sometimes I do think as founders, like we get very caught up, and I think at times like overly invested or vested in the outcome of something. I think sometimes it's good to actually take a step back, right? Look at things from the big picture, look at things from multiple perspectives. And then especially, in like when bad things happen, take the lens of like, what did we learn, right? Instead of just like, oh, it's all my fault. Like, because I think this is one of my old boss in Airbnb actually put this really well, which is his advice that he gave me was separate things in life between things that you have control of and things that you don't, right? And then just stop worrying about things you have no control, because even if you worry, it's not going to change. And at some point, you're just going to go crazy because you're worrying about this thing and you can't do anything about it, right? So focus your time and energy on things that you can control and you can change.
A lot more recently, I think the past year, building the Fractal ecosystem as well, there are definitely things that are like within our control, right? Like within my control, which is like, for example, a product roadmap, or like what can we actually do? What kind of like, work or effort or creative campaigns can we think of, right? For example, we just did the Halloween puzzle hunt and all the kind of things, right? These are the things that are more within our control. And definitely a lot of factors outside of that, right? The market's perception or other people's work or so on, right? But once in a while, I think like it's one of those things where you see a lot of like interesting developments. And I think at least right now within the Bitcoin space, there's just so much exciting developments happening that it just makes me feel very happy to be building this space as well.
One thing I wanted to mention too is like, for any builders in space, don't be afraid, don't be shy to ask for help, right? I think it's actually a great trait of a founder, that someone that proactively asks for help and asks for input, because I think, especially for the introverts, like you'd be surprised at how much willingness there is for people to help, right? For like, founders that have been building much longer than yourself, for even investors in the space. I think even for fundraising, there's a saying that like, ask for help and you'll get money, or ask for advice and you'll get money, ask for money and you'll get advice, right? People, especially in crypto, love to pay it forward and to help, I think, the next generation of founders succeed. Don't be shy there. I think you'll be surprised at, how much help and how much willingness there is and how much more connections you can make in the space from asking for help.
I definitely agree with that. Like asking for help is very, very underrated. a lot of people don't do it very well, or they just feel like too proud maybe to do so, right? But when you do that, sometimes you just like open yourself up for so much opportunities to even surprise yourself. That's really awesome. I think we talked about a lot of things today, right? We talked about your background. We've talked about the Bitcoin ecosystem. We talked about SatLayer's implementations, developers and so on. What can be built, all the kind of good stuff. I guess if you have a magic wand, what would you improve? Right now. Whether it's for SatLayer, or whether it's for Bitcoin, or whether it's for other things. Yeah.
I think if I had a magic wand, I would improve the overall market structure for new token launches and new projects. Because I think that's been one of the biggest challenges in the space, right? Is like, this this view of like, low FDV, high float, low FDV launches are bad, right? VC coins are bad. I think as with many things in crypto, it's a lot more nuanced, right? The reason we have low flow. Sorry, it's morning. Coffee has not fully kicked in. Yeah, low flow high FDV launches is thanks to the US SEC, right? Because any team that has like US co-founders or wants to play it conservatively is going to launch with a 1-year lockup and like really like a 3 to 4 year vesting, right? So what that means is like at launch, you're probably generally not going to have like that much tokens liquid because all the investor tokens aren't liquid, all the team tokens aren't liquid. It's going to be just like the initial airdrop for the most part, right? And so, that is a challenge in terms of price discovery and like healthy market structures for these new tokens. And so I think that's why you've seen this like on and off chatter. I think, it hasn't really picked up steam as some of the other kind of topics of discussion on Twitter, but it's in some ways like ICOs were actually good for that situation, right? Is that it allowed for much better price discovery, but also it actually allowed a lot of like retail users to actually invest early and to have this wealth effect to make money upon TGE and exchange listing, right? Which has been the struggle for a lot of tokens in the space. And that's honestly one of the reasons I joined the space full time is that in 2017 with the early ICOs, right? It was like the first time in a long time, maybe, like during my lifetime, where for once as a retail or like individual investor, I was able to actually front run the Silicon Valley VCs, right? Because previous to that, working at a lot of these venture-backed startups, right? There was no way any individual investor could invest in like Airbnb and like companies like Dropbox, right? Until the IPO, right? And at which point you're somewhat just like buying the bags of the, kind of the traditional VC funds, right? And the only way you could get access to these early deals was like, okay, if you were part of like the SF, like relatively elite circle and like had these VC friends that could get you maybe into like a round, right? And that was what really, I think, opened my eyes with ICOs was like, hey, we are actually investing before these VCs because a lot of traditional VCs were still wrapping their head on what is this token thing? What is this crypto thing? Right. And back then, at least it was, if you could figure out how to work MetaMask and like just send Ethereum to this contract, like you were able to invest in these early stage projects. Right. And so that's why I love the work of like, like Kobe and Echo, for example. Right. I think there are some efforts by founders to really, I think, bring this back to an extent, right? And CoinList is one of like the early kind of teams to try to tackle this, where it's like, yeah, let's democratize investing again, right? Because I think part of the challenge is like structurally, again, thanks to like the SEC and these like, shitty regulation by enforcement strategies, everyone's been afraid to do that. And it has kind of destroyed the wealth effect that was one of the things that made crypto amazing.
I totally agree with that. I think it also shows a little bit of like our vintage in crypto. Like I think the 2017 class of builders, definitely remember the ICOs and stuff a lot. And then even recently, right, I think Consensus laid off like some of their staff, and they also like Joseph Lubin also cited, like the enforcement by regulation by enforcement kind of mechanism that the SEC does to some of the things that they have unfortunately have to do, right? And that definitely creates a lot of issues. So yeah, I do hope that the industry evolve along the way, and of course we need to weed out bad actors as well.
100%.
But make sure that the good actors have a very, very good way to be able to build, gather information, price discovery, and everything else. Yeah, totally with you. Maybe like on the last note, what's your favorite like Bitcoin like ordinals or like collection these days?
Not Unchained Monkeys remains one of my favorite ones because I think they are one of the few kind of ordinals teams that's always been pushing the boundaries of the actual underlying tech, right? It's not just about I think vibes are something important. They have a great vibe that's very positive, that's very like respectful of community members, but and this in large part is like in some ways like Danny's personality, right? He's always kind of like loves these early things and then jamming and contributing on these like early frameworks or like technologies. So there is certainly I think a team that I like a lot.
Yeah, it's been amazing just talking to you today, Luke. Thank you so much for having coming on the Fractal podcast. I think for those of you in the audience, who's like looking at this episode, definitely check out SatLayer, on their website, satlayer.xyz.
Yep.
And the documentation, the DevNet, try it out, build an app and whatsoever. And yeah, I would love to have you on at some point in the future. Thank you so much, Luke.
Would love to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.